Which tools do you consider better? Books or software tools that automate work?
Wow. I'll tell you, I'm still fond of some traditional things, whether they be books or whatnot. But I'm kind of a geek. I like software tools too. So it really depends on what I'm using them for. And let me give you an example of what I mean. As an American, very few people drive manual transmission cars. I drive a manual transmission, right? But I also have all kinds of automation in my smartphone, and I'm very excited about someday being able to adjust the temperature in my house for my smartphone on the way home, and it seems like an odd mix, right? So it really depends on the item. But what I like is having a choice.
Right, so by having a choice, could you please detail what are your most used performance tools?
So the ones that I use most frequently, I have to be honest, are the ones that are either free, open source, or at least have a significant trial. So I'm very fond of JMeter, I'm very fond of OpenSTA. Currently I'm very fond of SOSTA Cloud Test because they have a free version that's robust enough to do some real performance testing. That said, some of the very expensive tools are very, very powerful, and I like them too, but I can't afford them. So I have to depend on my client to have them, but they're fun to use when somebody else has purchased them.
Cool. How do you see performance testing running, for example, in an agile environment compared with the older waterfall approach? What has changed?
Well, here's what's funny. When the Agile Manifesto came out, or the first time I found it, which was a year or so after it was written, I read it and I said, I literally took it and I said to my coworkers, isn't this how everybody works? And they said, well, that's how we work. And it wasn't until years later that I really encountered the waterfall methodology, and I said, how does anybody make this work? So I started saying performance testing is inherently agile. And what I mean by that is you can't really be effective in delivering, at least consistently, well-performing applications unless you're doing some performance testing from the very beginning. Now, it's not always the performance tester who's doing that performance testing, and that's where it gets kind of confusing because there's tasks and then there's the role. But what has changed is the more teams, the more organizations work to adopt Agile principles, the easier it is for me to share the message that developers have a performance testing responsibility too, and so do the ops or IT support folks. It all has to fit together, and if we're not sharing information and working together, then your traditional, if you will, your waterfall style performance tester will provide you a lot of data with no time to fix it. And fixing performance problems is often very expensive, involving new hardware, re-architecting, etc. So I think it's a good thing. I think the more we can integrate performance into part of our daily agile activities, the more consistently we'll be able to deliver good performance, and the happier our users are going to be.
Could you please tell us which are the top 3 buzzwords related to testing in the last years?
Wow. So I almost want to go do some crazy affinity search because I'm kind of like that. I would say this, the big major topics that get people all passionate and taking sides in testing over the last 4 or 5 years would be certification, automation, yeah, and probably Agile, but only because many organizations try to transition to Agile, and that's a culture change, and that's hard. It's not about being Agile or being waterfall, but if you take a bunch of people who have worked together in a waterfall environment for years, and you say, oh, here, go to this training course and now you're Agile. That's very confusing. And the testers get all, I don't even know what the right word is. They're concerned. They don't know where they fit anymore. And it causes them lots of stress. So that's been a big issue because of that. Now, many of those same testers, once they get integrated, they really like Agile. But culture shock is what we call it. It's a culture shock. Now, certification and automation, if you've been around testing or software, you understand where some of these come from. Automation has been a hot topic because a lot of folks believe that automation can replace human testers. And here's the truth, automation can do a whole lot of things and do a whole lot of and I like to automate things, but I've never met a piece of software that can make decisions and find bugs as well as a trained human. So you can't replace, you can augment, you can help a human test better, you can help a human test faster, you can get more coverage with automation, but you can't replace human beings with automation tools. And the challenge of certification, of course, is because we're really a community of skills, it's a real challenge to understand what any individual certification stands for. What does it mean? And if you haven't taken the certification yourself, and I don't know how it is here, but I know in the United States, we have recruiters, we have hiring managers. Not only aren't they testers, they've never worked in technology. And so they see certification, oh, this person must be good. They don't know what they mean. And maybe they are good and maybe they're not. But at the end of the day, it's only people who are familiar with what they mean that can make a good decision about them. And so that's been very challenging for us.
Yesterday, during the conference, you told us a story about your boss who said, you are right. And that was a win with your boss.
Yes.
Do you have other, let's say, free wins, but in other categories?
It's very interesting. A win is, most people would think that when I tell stories about big wins, that I'd be talking about running this great test or finding this great bug or stopping ship on something that was going to cost people billions of dollars. And yeah, that's a win. But that's a one-time, one-off. Maybe I got lucky. Maybe it's because I'm good. But it doesn't matter. It just happened. A win, to me, is when I help a person or an organization have that big light bulb, right? The idea or they change a little bit the way they think and look at things that leads to them having more success long after I'm gone. That to me is a win. So a lot of times I don't know that I've had a big win until maybe, here's a specific one. My second client after I started my own business, I'd lost touch with him. So I started my own business 8 years ago. I'd lost touch with him until about 18 months ago. I ran into him at a conference. First name's Tom. We'll stick with just Tom. And he came up to me and says, "You don't remember me, do you?" I said, "What do you mean I don't remember you, Tom?" And I told him the whole story about what I did and I said, "So what happened?" The short version of the story was they were doing performance testing and their executives were very mad because they weren't getting a whole lot done. I came on site for less than 90 minutes before I knew the problem. The problem was this. About every 10 minutes, a different vice president came in and told them to do something else. And of course, these vice presidents were not talking to each other, so what do? You know what I did? I took my chair and I put it in the doorway. And every time somebody walked in, I said, here, let's go get a coffee. And they're like, who are you? Didn't matter. All I was doing is stalling so these guys could finish a test. And after 3 days, they had these great results, and I didn't even look at a tool. I just let them do their work. And all the executives were happy and thrilled, but I was worried that when I left, that wasn't going to last. So I asked Thomas, how'd it go? He goes, well, for a while they let us do our work. And then he tells a story about new executives and takeover and money and whatever. He goes, I don't work for him anymore. I'm like, ugh. And I felt like it was a loss. He says, but then he says to me, but you know what? Now I have a team. And you know what I do? I sit in the doorway and I don't let the VPs tell them what to do. I was so proud. It sounds so silly, but I was so proud. I'm like, wow, what a silly little thing that has nothing to do with performance testing. And it was 7 years ago. And that just meant so much to me. It's like, wow, you can make that much of a difference. Not technical, not testing, just by helping solve a little social problem and somebody else, what do we call it? We call it pay it forward. Are you guys familiar with pay it forward? Yeah. And I think that's fabulous.
How do you see the differences of server versus desktop versus mobile application testing from a methodology point of view?
You know, it depends on who's defining methodology, and I know I sound like a tester, right? Because a tester always says it depends, right? So here's what I've learned over years of working in many, many different environments, from telecom to client server to, I worked for a company that made silicon-based fingerprint sensors. I got to test this. Actually, that's a really funny story. When you work for a hardware company and you're a software tester, as a software tester, you're used to not being very well respected. In a hardware company, software developers are not very well respected. And they think the testers are cool because they get to prove all the things the developers do wrong. So that's just kind of funny, sorry. But working in all these different environments here, here's what I've really learned is testing is something that just kind of becomes part of you. And if you're good at testing, it doesn't matter what it is you're testing. You will figure out how to do the bits and pieces, whether I need an automation tool, whether I have to do it manually, whether I need help from a developer, and whether I should be doing it early or late or in the middle, because those aren't the things that are most important to you as a tester. What's important to you is learning how it works, or learning how it might work, and then trying to find the ways in which it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And you know what? I test everything. I test the fridge. I test the glasses. I don't know if you guys noticed. I was playing with a Coke bottle cap earlier today, trying to see if I could get it to thread side. Why? Because I can't help it. And some people say, oh, that's just because you're Scott. I'm like, no, I watch people that really have that tester instinct, and they do it all the time. It's not about methodology. So how does the methodology differ? It differs in implementation, not thought.